Hi, I'm Mark, and today we need to talk about the never-ending story of Boris Johnson, and a little bit more. Boris Johnson's political career does not appear to be over yet. The politician whose career has always been marked by scandals and more scandals wants to know it again, as we would say in German. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson will again be standing in the Uxbridge and South Ruislip constituency in northwest London in the next British general election. The local branch of his Conservative Party voted for him on Thursday evening. Recently, there had been speculation that the former head of government wanted to run in a constituency that was considered safe, especially since media reports say Johnson has bought a new house in the county of Oxfordshire. In the previous general election in 2019, Johnson won the constituency by a margin of 7,000 votes. In view of the Labour Party's clear lead in polls, his re-election is considered at risk. Johnson himself confirmed to the Politico portal that he would compete again in Uxbridge and South Ruislip. The next parliamentary elections must take place in January 2025 at the latest. So far, an appointment in autumn 24 is considered likely. Conservative columnist Katie Ball speculated in the Times newspaper that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak could schedule the election as early as spring 2024, given his recent rise in popularity ratings, although it's not a big rise. Even if Johnson is no longer in the front row, he is always a topic of conversation, most recently with his plan to give his own father, a former MEP, the title Sir. This would be possible within the framework of the traditional resignation honours, with which British heads of government can honour deserving personalities after their departure. Stanley Johnson should enjoy such an honour, as well as about 100 other people on Johnson's list. The Times criticised Johnson's plans as morally wrong, and the newspaper also recently reported that Johnson wants 4 incumbent Conservative MPs to be made life members of the House of Lords. However, that would necessitate by-elections in the relevant constituencies, a risk that the Tories are reluctant to take given the catastrophic poll numbers. In addition to his scandals, Johnson is of course also largely responsible for Brexit. But we have to talk about another Prime Minister first. 6 years ago, the then Prime Minister signed the application to leave the EU. Since then, the country has been in a permanent state of crisis. March 29th in 2017 marked the point of no return in the British Brexit process because the then Prime Minister Theresa May submitted the application to the EU to withdraw, thereby resolving Article 50 of the EU Treaty outlining the procedure for the resignation of a member. You remember, Brexit means Brexit. And this case is unprecedented because it is the first time that a country wanted to leave the community. In a hasty referendum, which her predecessor David Cameron had allowed himself to be urged to hold, a narrowly majority of 52% voted in favour of leaving the EU, to everyone's surprise. And there was a lot of false promises. Money that was previously transferred to the EU would now be available to the NHS health service system. We remember Boris and the Red Bus. And by then, British politics had been making the EU the scapegoat for domestic problems for years. From then on, the kingdom is divided into the camps Leave and Remain. And after the referendum, Theresa May was elected Prime Minister with the sole task of implementing the result in a treaty with the EU. She called it Deliver Brexit. It's not at all easy to unravel 40 years of the EU there. The interdependencies had to be separated in all areas of life. Research programs and trade relations, security issues, those of customs, the movement of goods, and the competence of the EU judiciary had to be readjusted. And then, of course, there was the border with Northern Ireland. The question always arose as how tough Brexit would be. A minority of hardline Brexiteers blocked any progress in Parliament. The contract drawn up by Theresa May failed in Parliament, among other things, due to the resistance of Boris Johnson, who took office then in 2019, this time with the slogan, "Get Brexit Done." And after all, on January 1st, 2020, the UK is no longer a member of the EU, and that officially. But the price is high, and Johnson has negotiated a Northern Ireland agreement which he soon no longer wants to comply with. Brexit has meanwhile cost 4 prime ministers their offices, and in recent years has tied up almost all of their political energies. At times, Parliament's ability to act was even called into question. And the symptoms of Brexit are numerous. Lorry traffic jams in Dover, a phase when the petrol stations ran out of petrol, the strawberries from the patriotic domestic harvest rotting in the fields because not enough workers came from the EU. And for the same reason, patients died in the corona pandemic because there were too few nursing staff. In the supermarkets, there were gaps in the fruit and the vegetables for weeks, and instead of EU rules, exception rules now applied. If there's a lack of workers somewhere, visas are immediately made easier to issue, which actually runs counter to the strict migration policy. There are exceptions for truck drivers and harvest workers, and the list of shortage occupations has been expanded to include roofers, bricklayers, stonemasons, plasterers, and carpenters. The UK's Independent Budget Authority estimates that per capita disposable household income will shrink by 5.7% by 2024. The British standard of living is falling more than it has been in 70 years, and Theresa May, meanwhile, makes a living as a regular MP, as does Johnson, but he also makes millions with speeches. But of course, Brexit also has an impact on the EU, but at least a lot is being done there to compensate for the disadvantages that especially Boris Johnson brought upon everyone. For the German port of Cuxhaven, for example, as a central hub for trade with the British Isles, the United Kingdom's withdrawal from the European Union more than 3 years ago has far-reaching consequences. 10.3 million euros from the Brexit Adjustment Reserve are intended to cushion the negative effects now. Europe Minister Wiebke from Lower Saxony handed over a corresponding funding decision to Cooksport Managing Director Michael de Reze on Friday. The terminal operator wants to build additional logistics areas for freight traffic this year, as the completion of customs formalities will be considerably longer due to Great Britain's exit from the European single market. Brexit, with all its effects, is far from history, but a task for the future. It's therefore logical that EU funds are used precisely where the negative consequences occur, said the Lower Saxony Minister for Europe and Regional Affairs Wiebke Osigus during her visit. My ministry has persistently negotiated the participation of the federal states in the BAR funds, a success that is visible in Cuxhaven and will support trade with Great Britain in the future, Osigus said. Additional logistic areas for freight traffic will be urgently needed in the future. Without an expanded supply of space for the interim storage required by customs, there is a risk that logistics companies will switch to other ports for trade with Great Britain. We are therefore very happy that, thanks to the support of the EU, these areas can now be created, says de Reze. The importance of the port of Cooksport and an interface between land and sea transport is international, and the shipping connection between Cuxhaven and the United Kingdom is highly frequented, and therefore of importance far beyond the region. With several dozen companies and around 1,800 employees, the port industry is also an important part of the regional economy. The German state of Lower Saxony is investing a total of 10.5 million euros in the region. In addition to the funding for the logistics areas for customs clearance, the employment of additional staff at the State Fisheries Agency is supported with around 200,000 euros in order to guarantee the necessary certificates for the export of fishery products. And that is why I always, from time to time, bring up those special examples, also here from Germany, to show, of course, Brexit is not over. It's just getting started to become the real reality, and we will have to deal with the consequences for years, and especially with adjusting to the situation. That will also take years for many areas and many places all over Europe. But whenever I'm talking about this, there are a lot of differences of impact. First of all, the UK will always be the one that's hardest hit by Brexit. The EU is still 27 members and a big single market for everyone in there. And the other point is, unlike the British farmers, for example, the EU compensates a lot of branches that are really affected by Brexit much more than the UK government does with their farmers, for example, and many others. And that's the big difference. And if you haven't had a look yesterday, the new channel Outside Views Games is online. The link is always in the description. The first game there is a Europe trivia, and it's not about politics. So if you want to test your knowledge on Europe, just have a look. It will be completely mixed topics. So this time it is one from the category countries and continents. Next time it will be movie and TV, and it will always be in the future on the first of every month that a video comes out. And in May, of course, I know only a few of you are interested in that topic, but still I'm bringing in May an Eurovision Song Contest quiz, of course, because that is the month of the ESC. And but in time there will be more and more trivia games on different topics from a wide range of topics. So that is for a change not a political channel. And just try to play the game. You can play with friends, you can play with family. It's easy to do, and you might still even learn something on these quizzes. And the first is online already. And I'll see you there. I'll be back.